So, Ashokji, you can start with my wish and then we'll get into the reading.
Star Meher Baba ki Jai. My wish. The lover has to keep the wish of the beloved. My wish for my lovers is as follows. 1. Do not shirk your responsibilities. 2. Attend faithfully to your duties, but keep always at the back of your mind that all this is Baba's. 3. When you feel happy, think Baba wants me to be happy. When you suffer, think Baba wants me to suffer. 4. Be resigned to every situation and think honestly and sincerely Baba has placed me in this situation. 5. With the understanding that Baba is in everyone, try to help and serve others. 6. I say with my divine authority to each and all that whosoever takes my name at the time of breathing his last comes to me. So do not forget to remember me in your last moments. Unless you start remembering me from now on, it will be difficult to remember me when your end approaches. You should start practicing from now on. Even if you take my name only once every day, you will not forget to remember me in your dying moments. Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai.
Avtar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Thank you. So, we are back to reading from page 202 on the ebook. And we are in the section for God intoxicated, and starting the section where Baba is coming back to Mehrabad, right? So, any thoughts before we get started? Any questions? No. So let's get started. I will probably read for some time, and then we can always rotate. Visit to Mehrabad. Our first visit to Mehrabad was momentous one for us. Here we were to meet the other members of the Mandali, and the women were to visit the special group of Indian women disciples. We left Nasik shortly after midnight in order to avoid the heat of daytime travel and arrived at Maharashtra just at daybreak. Baba's men were gathered outside the doorway of the ashram to greet us as we drove up to the house. A few we already knew and loved, having been with them in the West or at Nashik, and with these new brothers, we felt the same quiet strength, same selfless love, and wholehearted dedication to our Master's service, which had endeared the others to us. Their quarters were situated in an open stretch of level country with mountains in the distance. The building, extremely simple, consisted of one large main room about 30 by 20 feet, which served as the general meeting room in the daytime and at night was converted into sleeping quarters through the simple expedient of placing bedding rolls upon the floor. To one side of this room was a smaller one for cooking and eating, and on the other side were the washrooms and the free medical dispensary for the neighboring villagers. Everything was so immaculately clean that one had the impression that even the floors would be sanitary enough to eat off. After a short visit with the men, the Western men were taken by Baba across the road and up the hill, where 6 Eastern women have been secluded for many years. This meeting of the Western women with our Eastern sisters in Baba was a memorable experience. As we embraced each other, we felt, as we had on the boat the day of our arrival in Bombay, how the love of our blessed Master united us and enabled us to transcend any outer barriers of language or background. Certainly, more opposite types could scarcely have been brought together. The Western group was a former dancer in the Russian ballet, Margaret Krask, a woman with her own insurance business in New York, Elizabeth Patterson, an actress who had held salons in many of the large European cities, Norina Machabali, two other actresses, Delia De Leon and Ruano Boglislav, an artist, Rano Gailey, and one who had devoted a number of years to social work in the slums, almshouses, prisons, and hospitals of New York, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, Jean Adriel. Practically all were women who had traveled extensively and seen much of what is popularly termed life. Contrasted with us were these sheltered, saintly women who, up to the time of our coming to India, had traveled no further than from one ashram to another within a radius of 100 miles, as Baba moved his headquarters from time to time. In this group were Baba's sister, a beautiful young woman, about 18 at the time we met her, and two others a few years older, all of whom had been with Baba since they were children of 10 or 12, and from that time had seen no other man than Baba. Three older women, one of whom was the mother of one of the younger ones, had also been living this life of seclusion for many years. I'll pause here. The room that is being talked about here in the earlier page must be the Mandali Hall in Lower Mehrabad, because they're talking about walking across and up the hill after that building is talked about. So I think there was at some
Which
time
year is this? Which year is this now? We are
30s, 30s.
yeah.
This is the 30s.
Which year?
Uh,
30s, right?
Specifically, I don't know. Wait, let me look
No, no, it
behind.
must be.
I mean,
See, 34 or 35 was this Nasik thing. After from Nasik, they are coming to Mehrabad. So first they
correct.
came to Nasik. On the way, they
Ah,
stayed at Igatpuri. Then they also stayed at another hill station. Forget it. There they have a big lake. Uh,
okay.
so from
Mahabaleshwar.
there they went to Nasik. No, no, not Mahabaleshwar. Bhandardhara. Remember? Then they also stayed at Bhandardhara, and from Bhandardhara
Okay, I think Sanjay ji is on the road, so the network voice quality is not.
26. So that time definitely the first floor was not ready of the upper hill tank thing. But this could
Correct.
also be the 20 by 20 could also be the library room or the where we have the museum. But
Yeah,
museum
yeah,
is big,
correct.
much bigger actually. Museum is much bigger than 30 by
No, no,
20
but
could be this
all that
library
is
room.
all that is upper Mehrabad. So I think
Okay.
the way it read uh, was it looks like the lower Mehrabad Mandali Hall and surrounding buildings, because there is a bunch of restrooms near Mandali Hall.
Yeah.
I'm not
Mandli
sure of
Hall
the
is
kit.
much bigger.
That's
My
true.
my concern is only with the size. Yeah. So it could be some
Hmm.
other room where Baba had
Also,
earlier
yeah,
stayed.
correct.
Mera's accommodation that we read in Mera book, that also
Ah,
must have been there at that point of time. The
true,
one near the railway crossing, because that was demolished much later.
true.
It was demolished. Yeah.
If we
Okay.
notice a year reference, I'll point it out as we read. Let's continue reading. Jai Baba. I felt we had much to learn from them, but it was difficult to see what our contribution to them might be. In general, I think that the West has a distinct contribution to make to the East, just as the East has its unique heritage to share with mankind. In the coming years, this amalgamation must surely take place if the human race is to advance further in consciousness. The conscious use of will by which Western man achieves his material goals must be balanced with the sensitive, feeling faculties of the Easterner. Before this union of the opposites can become an actuality, however, both Easterner and Westerner must become aware of their need for part of their being as individuals and as nations. Beautiful point that's being made here. So Baba has said it as well. But she brings out two different things other than the difference between the East and the West, which Baba says is the mind and the heart. She uses a different term. She says mind represented by will. Through willpower, man has achieved a lot on the Western side, and the Eastern faculty that she gives a lot of credibility to is feeling, and says that the first step is the each of them have to recognize the absence of the other, and that's the starting point of coming together, right? Anyway, very interesting. Let's continue. But these women, long conditioned by the master to a type of consciousness which transcends both the mental and emotional drives, seem to need nothing which we had to offer. Their house on the hill, in which they lived their quiet, gentle lives, was surrounded by a wall 12 feet high. This enclosed a compound of about 40 feet square upon which two houses faced. The larger one consisted at that time of a single room about 30 feet by 20. The chief appointments of the room were six iron beds, each with its mosquito netting canopy. Beside each bed was a small wooden trunk in which were kept the few belongings of the women and a straight wooden chair. There were no ornaments, no gadgets, no books. The most austere convent would be luxurious by comparison. Yet, in some indefinable way, an impression of gracious living was conveyed. In spite of the ascetic background, one felt nothing of the spirit of asceticism. How could there be, with the warmth of Baba's radiant spirit, blessing and adorning this house? I'll read that line again. How could there be, with the warmth of Baba's radiant spirit, blessing and adorning this house? Though on the surface their lives were acutely circumscribed, monotonous, and meager, their faces bore the unmistakable imprint of a happier, more contented life than we Westerners, with our so called full, colorful lives, had ever known. In them, we saw the result of consciousness superseding the intellect with its tendency to speculate and argue. As they performed quietly and graciously their simple tasks, one sensed that the heat of striving for either material or spiritual goals was no longer theirs, if it ever had been. Pure soul force flowed into their free and spontaneous actions. Having no need to disburden themselves of mental impressions and feeling no inclination toward gossip, they spoke but little. But one could see that they lived deeply, consciously, each one a distinct individual. A significant story is told of one of these holy women when Mehra, who was born of a cultured Parsi family in Pune, was a little girl of 7 or 8. She felt drawn one day to stop at the tree under which Baba Jan sat with her circle of disciples and pilgrims. The aged master greeted the child warmly and, in course of conversation, asked her what she would like above everything in the world. The little girl, after pondering the question for a few minutes, replied that she would like a white horse on which she could ride. Babajan smiled and promised her that she would have such a horse and that she would be honored by everyone who saw her with it. When she returned home, her mother told her she had a surprise for her. There, in the compound, was a snow white horse which her mother had purchased that day in the bazaar. The spiritual significance of this incident becomes apparent while we realize that the avatar of this age has as the white horse avatar. And since this little girl, Mehra, now a beautiful young woman, occupies the place of as ashram, the story suggests a deeper meaning than purely objective. Beloved above all others by Baba and the other woman on the hill, she is second only to the master in the hearts of her spiritual sisters. Because of the utter selflessness of her devotion to the divine beloved, which Baba once described as surpassing the love of anyone in the world, is she worthy of the homage which is accorded to her. Having sacrificed one holds most dear, she receives from the Master the greatest love. To anyone familiar with Baba's way of working, it seems quite possible that through these chosen and safeguarded women, he is resurrecting the soul of woman from her age old bondage to the male side of life, so that in the impending new day, she may be free to take her destined place as the co worker with man, no longer his subordinate, to be dominated by his intellect and enslaved by his desires. So again, like I said, Jean Adriel looks at things both in the detail level and then steps back pretty often and looks at the big picture and inserts very beautiful comments here and there. So if you look at the last paragraph, I've heard many authors talk about women's emancipation and Meher Baba's role. She does this beautifully in one little paragraph here, right? So she says that through work with these women, obviously Baba is trying to unlock and equate, not just equate is a very uh, low end word, uh, give the deserving place of women in society and in work and in commercial enterprise. And he's working through these women to reach that objective for the whole of the world, right? I continue. Because we Westerners were still far from the conscious inner freedom which these holy women enjoyed, many of us suffered acutely on the Mehrabad trips. I felt as if I were being required to function in a kind of mental vacuum. It was so unfamiliar, so strange, yet with peaceful, yet with all peaceful and lovely. It was like being dropped into a fair country where language is neither spoken nor read, but where people go about their affairs with serene, happy faces, communicating with each other by some inner means which one does not know, one does not yet know. The God of the Westerner, the intellect was being dethroned, and I, for one, had to enthrone the true God, the balanced soul life in my innermost being. I repeat the line, the God of the Westerner, the intellect, was being dethroned, and I, for one, had to enthrone the true God, the balanced soul life in my innermost being. The inner conflict which was generated within me intensified the severe headaches which were becoming an almost daily anguish. Yet always, on leaving this hilltop sanctuary, I felt as if I had participated in a sacred and profound experience. Driving away in the late afternoon, just as the oriental sun was sinking behind the distant hills, painting the sky with liquid rubies, topaz, and amethysts, I would feel myself purged and uplifted, better able to appreciate the transcendental beauty and wisdom which is inherent in the soul of the perfect master. Next section, sacred sightseeing. Our strict confinement to the 24-acre property was periodically relieved by motor trips with Baba to places of spiritual interest. He took us first to the town of Nasik, about 5 miles from our ashram. Here, we found an oriental town untouched by Western civilization, one therefore which retains all its dirt, spicy odors, color, and uncivilized charm. Nasik has long been considered one of the sacred cities of India. Its ancient name, Janasthana, the place of sacrifice, is mentioned in the Ramayana, one of the revered books of the Hindus, as the dwelling place of Rama, and his wife Sita during their voluntary exile. One finds here many relics connected with the spiritually romantic tales of this great epic. Mukherjee, in his Visit India with Me, also mentions Nasik as one of the places where Jesus is reputed to have stayed during his legendary visit to India. After halting at the bridge which spans the Godavari, one of the sacred waterways of India, we threaded our way through another portion of the city to a spot on the Godavari called Gangapur, a place of sacred pilgrimage for centuries. Here, Baba led us past the many separate shrines to a spot under the rocks just at the base of a waterfall, a place in which the yogis delighted to meditate. The roar and rhythm of the falling water helped them to achieve a still mind. Baba seated himself under the overhanging rock while we grouped ourselves silently at his feet, with the water gurgling past us just a few yards away. We were no yogis, but we felt the deep peace which quiet moments with Baba always engender. Some of the shrine watchers who had recognized Baba stood a little to one side with worship in their eyes. It was a new and wholesome experience for us to see the veneration which these strangers accorded the Master. Another expedition with Baba, which was for me particularly significant, took us about 5 miles from Nasik to the Pandulena caves. These rock dwellings, 22 in number, are situated near the top of a mountain which commands a magnificent view of the whole surrounding country. Most of them were originally carved out of the rocky mountain wall by the Pandava brothers, disciples of the Avatar Krishna, who lived, according to some traditions, about the 7th century BC. The legend tells how Yudhishthira, then overlord of all India, had gambled away his kingdom in a game of dice. As punishment, he and his 4 brothers, of whom Arjuna was one, were banished from the kingdom and wandered as homeless exiles for about 12 years. It was during this period that they carved out these caves as shelter for themselves. Here, Krishna and other great sages came to visit them, and from here they wandered forth with Krishna on many pilgrimages. No doubt, the exile constituted the preparatory phase to that great battle of Mahabharata, Kurukshetra, in which Arjuna received his initiation at Krishna's hands. It seems as if a similar drama has but recently been enacted on a more comprehensive scale, and perhaps Baba's foreknowledge of the war to come was one of the reasons he made a special point of our visiting these caves. Again, a group of disciples had been undergoing long years of rigorous training preparatory to a world initiation which the subsequent worldwide war heralded. In later times, other masters lived in these caves with their disciples and left upon them the imprint of their lives there. A particularly unusual one had been occupied by a famous Jain master with his circle of 18 men. A balcony, which extended in a semicircle around the cave, was supported by 17 pillars, each resting on a massive stone jar. In the center of the cave was a raised pedestal or altar. On the steps in the center, where Baba sat now, the former master would sit, Baba informed us, with his disciples gathered around him on the steps below as he instructed them in spiritual truth. An adjoining cave with 18 cells, also carved out of the rock, they used for meditation. Another profoundly impressive cave contained, in an alcove at the rear, a giant figure of the Buddha which was not visible on first entering the cave, but as one's eyes became accustomed to the darkness, it suddenly stood out in bold relief, as though some rear lighting had been mysteriously turned on. The spiritual power in this cave was prodigious. one felt inclined to linger here and tune in on the potent wavelength which the accumulated meditative produced. But Baba hastily led us on to the next cave. Since prior to this trip I had been rather ill, Baba assisted me in my climb up the mountain by taking my hand. As we neared the place of the caves, I turned to look out over the broad expanse of plain which lay below us. Instantly, there flashed through my mind the memory of the mountaintop experience which I have described at the beginning of this volume, one of those contacts with reality which had prepared me for the meeting with the Master. The experience having been so vivid and profound that naturally left an indelible imprint upon my mind. Now, as I looked out over the valley below, I saw the same landscape, the same relation of countryside below to the place on which I was standing, as I had witnessed in that transcendent experience. I turned to Baba and asked him if he knew of what the scene reminded me. He nodded, smiling, and indicated to me the mountain top. Then, for a timeless, supernal moment in which unutterable truths were conveyed, his eyes held mine. In ways which defy the rational mind, I had, years before, tuned in on this mountain top of initiation, reliving an ancient experience and perhaps anticipating one which was to come. Later, as we were getting into our cars, Baba told us that some of us would go back to those caves someday and stay there with him for a while. A. Major crisis. An important aspect in Baba's technique of freeing his disciples from their bondage to the past, from their egocentric selves, is the crisis, which he so skillfully induces. Inevitably, after coming in close touch with Baba, the life processes are so speeded up that one finds oneself in the midst of circumstances which compel one to do some penetrating soul searching. It is not necessary that we be with Baba outwardly to participate in the speeding up process. Many who have established a deep inner connect with him, a deep inner contact with him, but have not met him in the flesh, have experienced the same intensification of rhythm. But being with him physically usually makes the experience more dramatic, more poignant. No one who is close to Baba escapes this treatment, which, though painful, strips off the constricting veils from the real self and opens the way to a more abundant life. Such a crisis developed for me when I had been in India a little over a month. Baba was on the fifth day of his 40-day fast, and we had long ago been told that something significant always happened on the fifth day of any of Baba's special activities. Certainly, it did for me. One sultry afternoon, having one of my frequent headaches, I had not gone over to the main house for tea. I had instead been brought to my room by one of the servants. I was sitting up in bed, cross legged, with the thinnest of nightgowns on, when suddenly the pot full of boiling water overturned onto my lap. As may be imagined, the pain was excruciating. I had nothing to apply to the seared flesh, and there was no one within calling distance. There was nothing to do but wait, with as much fortitude as I could muster, until tea was over and someone came back to our building. About 40 minutes later, Malcolm and the others returned to their rooms. Baba was at Rahuri, but word of the accident was telephoned immediately to him. One of his first questions, was she brave? Indicates the essential quality in a disciple which he looks for at such times. The doctor whom Baba recommended arrived about an hour later. One strange and psychologically important feature of this experience was a dream which I had had just the night before of being burned at the stake. Evidently, my inner being knew that I was ripe for a drastic purification to such an extent that it immediately became objectified in my outer life in the form of the accident. When Baba arrived a couple of days later, after assuring himself that I had received the proper care, he told me that painful though the burn was, its results would be good. He showed keen interest in the dream. Though the acute pain diminished after a few days, the nervous shock lasted for some weeks. Just as I was beginning to limp around my room, a bit altercation arose between Malcolm and another man. Now, in retrospect, it is quite apparent that Baba engineered the whole conflict and drew me into it to effect one of his major surgical operations, perhaps a three-in-one operation, because as time has since revealed, all three of us have been compelled by force of subsequent circumstances to face the emotional conflict involved in this crisis. I, for one, realize it to be the most helpful of many benefits which Baba has rendered me, for it was the initiatory momentum which compelled me to integrate into my conscious life certain latent qualities of soul, without which I would have remained very lopsided. At the time of the crisis, however, I did not see it this way. But as Baba predicted when he heard of the accident, the salutary effects of this painful ordeal have been incommensurable. After speaking to me in the morning about this friction between the two men, Baba said he wished us all to meet together when the whole affair would be thrashed out. The other man had written an editorial for the new magazine on which some of us were assigned to work. Malcolm groaned when he heard it, for it was not pontifical. It for when it was not pontifical, it dripped with sentimentality. When he spoke to Baba about it, he was instructed to put in writing his comments on it. Though his criticism was justified and in fact ordered by Baba, the other man could not take it. He responded with a vitriolic outpouring which made me feel actually ill when I read it. Baba pointed out that my reaction to it was due to the fact that there was something in me, something in my relationship to this man, which absorbed the poison of his remarks. Consequently, I was indirectly involved in the situation. Baba gave me very explicit orders to say quite frankly whatever came into my mind, and when we all met together, regardless of its possible effect upon the two men or upon myself. Late that afternoon, I was helped down to the room at the far end of our long porch. There, with Baba as the masterly director, the crisis, of which the dream and the burn were but the prefiguration, took place. Considering the symbolism inherent in both the dream and the accident, I have no doubt that the session in that room marked the beginning of a life initiation which was destined to take us all to the brink of the abyss. Upon me, it has bestowed a more universal understanding of love and human relationships, such as every woman must experience if she is to fulfill her appointed destiny. Baba directed each of the two men to give his side of the affair. Then I was told to say wherein I thought each one was at fault. The emotional pain which this produced in me seems now, as it did even 24 hours later, out of all proportion to the immediate cause, an indication, no doubt, of the deep unconscious forces which Baba was bringing into consciousness. I felt as though I were undergoing all the anguish which woman has ever suffered for the man she loves. Yet, all I was doing was to say frankly what I thought were the basic faults in the two men's characters which had precipitated this unhappy situation. By compelling me to override my feminine instinct to avoid painful controversy, Baba was bringing into my consciousness the fearlessness of the male side of my nature, which was largely dormant. By this means, he was releasing me from an age old bondage which I shared with most of womankind, the bondage of fear that she will lose the loved one if she chooses the strong course and ceases to cater to his egocentricity and his role of intellectual dominance. Beautiful things being said here about what Baba is working on, Jean. In taking this line of least resistance in her contacts with man, women relegates herself to an inferior position and impedes the expression of max, which is to arouse in man his latent soul side. But to do this, she may have to inflict pain or risk his displeasure, even to the point of forfeiting her close relationship with him. Wonderful. Since writing the above, I have read In Search of Maturity by Dr. Kunkel, in which I find corroborated the above conclusions. And she quotes, finally, we may meet the great test of maturity, if necessary, to inflict consciously and conscientiously pain and sacrifice upon our most beloved friends. End quote. Only the perspective of time, however, revealed these things. While in the midst of it, I felt that Baba was unnecessarily cruel in compelling me to participate in this dispute. My only part in it had been that of arbitrator, but Baba, with his penetrating insight, knowing better than I, used this occasion to teach me a greatly needed lesson. Firstly, he would stir up my emotions by insisting I speak my mind. Then he would include me to become calm, detached. This soul surgery continued for about an hour, during which time I must have recapitulated all the emotional crises of my entire life, and there had been many. Perhaps this emotional review was another aspect of Baba's game, one for which at the time I felt a little zest. When it was finally over, I was utterly shattered. I had to be carried back to my bed, where for hours I lay sobbing with hysterical heartbreak. I could see no reason for the ordeal to which Baba had subjected me. The tender, loving father seemed to have become the devil himself. When he looked in on me a little later, I told him I could not stand any more. I had reached my limit of endurance. Then, from sheer exhaustion, I fell asleep. On awakening in the morning, I felt more dead than alive. My body seemed drained of life, my soul devoid of hope, my heart barren and cold. The brilliant Indian sun infiltrating through the doors and windows of my room was powerless to penetrate my inner darkness. Later, I sat on our back porch with Malcolm in silence. I saw the sympathy in his eyes, but my heart could not receive it. Where faith had upheld me, despair now ruled. Where love had drawn and impelled me, icy fingers gripped my heart. My God had failed me. I longed for the oblivion of unconsciousness, for the peace of utter annihilation. The great temptation which comes to all at this moment of the soul's Calvary. Then I thought of Jesus' agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, how even he had to have the cup removed from him. But with the next breath, I remembered the succeeding words. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. Not my will, but thine. Here was the key to my problem. I let the word sink deep into my soul. A deeper abandonment to God, to my master, an incarnation of God. This was what was required of me. Much of my anguish was due to my rebellion against what Baba knew to be for my highest good. I had trusted him for many years. He had not failed me. I must know that he was not failing me now. He saw more deeply into my need than I could possibly see. And better than I, he knew how to meet that need. In my heart, I offered my life to him anew to use as he deemed best. I accepted the darkness, then I let go. At that moment, out across the fields, a robin sang its liquid canticle, and with its melting lilt, a blockage was released in me, and peace poured into my heart. A few minutes later, with his perfect timing, Baba appeared. He had pointedly stayed away until this moment. He looked at me seriously, questioning me with his eyes, even as a surgeon examines his patient after a major operation. Then I asked him a question. Is it possible to love God merely through obedience when feeling is absent? He smiled. The operation had been successful and the patient would live. It is the highest form of love, he replied. Later in the day, with Malcolm's help, I walked over to Baba's room to tell him he could finish the job whenever he wished. The look of happy satisfaction which he gave me wiped away the last vestige of pain. Such an experience as this reveals many other basic truths in addition to the fundamental lesson one needs to learn. I see now what an invaluable service Baba rendered me in compelling me to accept the dark side of life as well as the light, the devil as well as God, crucifixion as well as resurrection. Through this crisis, he inspired in me a deeper surrender to the will of God, of the Master, than I had yet made. I had offered myself to God. The Master was making sure that no hidden sins or virtues were being withheld. I had always before run away from love where it hurt. Now I was learning to love in spite of the pain, to have faith in spite of disillusionment. I could never, I could now better understand those words of Khalil Gibran. For even as love crowns you, so shall he crucify you. Even as he is for your growth, so is he for your pruning. He threshes you to make you naked. He grinds you to whiteness. And then he assigns you to his sacred fire that you may become sacred bread for God's sacred feast. I'll read these beautiful lines again. Khalil Gibran. For even as love crowns you, so shall he crucify you. Even as he is for your growth, so is he for your pruning. He threshes you to make naked. He grinds you to whiteness. And then he assigns you to his sacred fire that you may become sacred bread for God's sacred feast. Doubtless, there were also other implications in this upheaval than the purely personal ones. Once, in the early days, one of his Eastern men, puzzled at Baba's methods, asked why he sometimes subjected them to ordeals for which they could find no reason. Baba then told him that occasionally for his universal work, he needs the energy resident in the emotions, and to avail himself of fit, he would stir up the emotional nature of one or more of his disciples. Whom else should I use for my work if not my own? I've related this personal experience to illustrate how a master of life works when he knows a soul to be ready for an important step in unfoldment. All of Baba's disciples, in some measure, pass through a similar ordeal, and all are agreed that the beneficial results are profound and far reaching. Like the modern psychotherapist, but in his unique and superior way, Baba uncovers whatever lies hidden in the recesses of the unconscious. Both the demons and the angels are released to be utilized in more creative living. And when the moment is ripe, the deep transference which in the beginning he fosters, he finally resolves. The wider ramifications of this particular crisis are only now becoming apparent. Another of Baba's inimitable techniques is to work out a small scale model of events swiftly in dramatic and realistic form. It is as if by this means he registers such the timekeeper who, over a later and longer period of time and through the medium of daily circumstances, slowly unfurls the dramatic sequences previewed earlier, giving more time for each phase of the drama to be thoroughly assimilated. Certainly, this was so in my own case, as the later life pattern proved. So, this is a very personal experience. And I think a lot of us, like she says, a lot of accounts exist of how intensification of emotional experiences and emotional episodes are often a technique that Baba employs to further us on our journeys. And I think not just the disciples and the recorded history, but quite a few of us have also experienced the same.
Yeah, I think there are few words which are good to meditate upon is the
You are not coming through. The few words you said, and then you
and our
trailed off.
master applies on his disciple. Yeah, yeah, it's crucifixion and resurrection each day, the growth and the pruning, as she said,
Yes,
he foders the tree to grow, and he also prunes it to make it look beautiful. But while
correct.
pruning, you feel sad, you feel pained, or you question why I'm being put to this kind of trouble. But actually, that is pruning that he's doing on you. So a lot of things to meditate upon this message, rather than
Correct. Because we cannot come
subject.
to
Yeah.
terms with the pruning, with the threshing that he is doing. And
Yes, yes, yes.
like she herself says, that time she did not understand the significance of what she went through. And it takes a lot
Yes.
of thinking and maturity to be able to accept what at real time. But over
Mm.
time, it is only his pruning, and it is only his work that is being carried out.
Yeah, yeah.
Correct.
This pruning and crucifixion is all over actually. Is mental, is physical, is emotional, everything actually. That's all that is crucifixion in atomic forms. Crucifixion doesn't mean just the death of Christ. It's that everybody on a daily life passes through it. That's all it is.
Interesting. I think that's a good point you're making, and that's the significance that she gives to this resurrection and crucifixion as well. So yeah, very interesting. Cool. Let's continue. Birthday feast. That's the next section. One of the most memorable experiences of our stay in India was Baba's birthday celebration, the preparations for which began shortly after our arrival in December. 40 days before the birthday, a fast began in which we all shared. The 15 of us in turn joined Baba in a 1 day fast of 2 cups of tea and 2 cups of milk. Again, we all participated as he fasted without even water for 24 hours of the day. Some weeks before his birthday, Baba assigned specific each duties to each of his Indian disciples, but like the generalissimo that he is, kept himself in touch with the overall plans by calling his men to him from time to time to give account of their particular duties. All of his devotees, embracing Brahmin, Maratha, Harijan, Christian, Parsi, and Mohammedan, were notified and their help solicited in distributing the handbills in different languages among the slum districts presidency, the Gujarat and the Deccan, inviting the poor to the birthday feast. Accommodations were engaged in the neighborhood of the Nasik ashram for the devotees who would be staying a night or two. Buses were chartered to convey them from the railway station to their cottages and to the ashram grounds. An enormous tent, 250 feet long by 150 feet wide, was erected to protect the visitors from the heat and the glare of the sun. A smaller one was erected for kitchen use. Brahmin cooks and helpers were engaged. Ditches were dug in the ground and covered with brick and stone to form the stoves and ovens. All the paraphernalia to cook and serve food to 1,500 people was imported from Bombay, and with Baba supervising every detail, a commissary was set up that would well have rivaled for efficiency New York's finest caterers. Thousands of yards of cloth had been purchased together with tons of rice and lentils to be made into birthday packages for the poor. The Westerners worked at all spare moments, tying up these bundles of food until finally a pyramid of packages, 12 feet high, arose in the midst of the garden. The ashram hummed with activity, and by the 15th of February, the preparations were completed. With Baba's arrival from Meherabad, our fatigue vanished like mist before the sun. Knowing that all action initiated or supervised by Baba is symbolic, one may see in this concentrated effort of the Westerners to prepare gifts of food and clothing for the poor, a token gesture of the role America played was to play in rehabilitating the poor of the world, made destitute by man's greed and lust for power. On the day of Baba's arrival came the Brahmin cooks, and the following morning the kitchen was completely installed. Huge brass and copper cauldrons steamed with rice, vegetables, laddu, an Indian sweet, and tea. The cooks were naked to the waist, with the sacred thread of the Brahmin caste dangling from their necks. They were magnificent looking men of fine carriage and dignity. They might readily have been mistaken for the great teachers or holy men. Being cooks apparently in no way impaired their sense of being the ruling caste of India. In an attempt to see what was being cooked, two of us approached one of the steaming copper cauldrons. Quickly, one of the cooks asked us to move away. A strict Brahmin would not eat food which had been polluted by a non-Brahmin shadow cast upon it. In view of this, it was a heartwarming sight to see later in the day Baba's Brahmin devotees eating their meal in close proximity to devotees of other castes, many of whom were untouchables. One elderly Hindu, himself a Brahmin, approached Malcolm, who was watching the devotees at lunch. Is this universal brotherhood I see? He asked, smiling. I hope it is a step in that direction, was Malcolm's reply. It is indeed, the devotee rejoined, and one which only a perfect master like Sri Meher Baba, through the influence of his divine love, could inspire. It was an impressive sight to see
Yeah,
these some.
this
Yeah,
is this 1937, right? So this is 1937. Baba's birthday was celebrated in Nasik. I think we have films also of this birthday celebration in Nasik. There are films available. And during this birthday, Baba gave prasad to thousands of people by his own hand, and it was in the form of a potli. You know, they were preparing the prasad as previously we read. It was a cloth in which there were some grains or other things, you know, that was all
correct,
put, and then Baba distributed that potli, what we call it in the, you know, that little sack,
correct,
you
correct,
may say. Yeah,
correct,
yeah,
correct, correct,
yeah.
correct. So
And Baba
actually,
was so very beautiful in this age, actually.
mhm,
1937 pictures of his, if you see, his curly hair would fall in front of his shoulders from his sides, and
uh-huh,
he was very very beautiful actually. 1937 he was 42 years, 46, 43 years of age. So handsome
mhm.
looking actually. Lovely to see these pictures. Yeah, Jai Baba. Just a
Lovely.
digression. Jai Baba.
Yeah, so I missed the point if this was back in Nasik because we were in a section which brought them to Mehrabad, and then the episode happened with her. So I don't know if the birthday is happening in Nasik or it's still in Mehrabad. But if you're so sure of the Portly episode and the distribution by hand, maybe you have a point. This must be Nasik. Anyway, we'll continue reading.
Yeah, we can recheck. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Inside, we see these some 700 devotees of Baba sitting together on the ground in long rows as they ate their noonday meal. The Brahmins prayed for 2 minutes before the food was served. The Mohammedan commenced their meal with the customary Bismillah, begin in the name of the Lord. The Maratha men stripped to their waist as their ritual before eating, before any of the guests touched their food, and after they had performed their traditional devotions, the tents resounded with the choruses of Sri Sadguru Meher Baba Maharaj Ki Jai. Hail Sri Meher Baba, the perfect master, the great king. Nor would any of the arriving guests take even a cup of tea until they had paid their respects to Baba. After luncheon, Baba called the Western group to his little straw hut in the garden, which had been built as a special resting place for him. There, on his knees, beside the master, was the figure of an elderly Hindu. His eyes were closed in ecstasy, his eyes lovingly caressed Baba's feet. This man, a saint, had seen Baba's photograph the year before in the home of one of Baba's devotees and immediately recognized him as a God realized master. And though he himself was And though he himself was worshipped as a saint by his own devotees, some of whom he had brought with him to the birthday feast, he offered Baba the full homage of his awakened heart as he buried his head in Baba's breast, overcome by spiritual emotion. A few moments later, Baba left the tent with the group following. One of the saint's disciples plucked a rose and handed it to him. Still deeply stirred by his meeting with the master, the saint inhaled the fragrance of the flower, touched it to his forehead, his eyes, the top and back of his head, and finally to his heart. Then, partially dazed, stumbled off to the large tent supported by two of his men. Later in the day, when one of the Western disciples who had not met the elderly saint in the hut was introduced to him, he looked at her for several minutes and smiled. Always be happy as you are now, one of his devotees translated for her. Then he embraced her. Taking a scarf from the neck of one of his followers, he gave it to her. Then, linking her arm in his, he led her through the tent toward the kitchen where he found Baba. Taking her hand, he placed it in Baba's and then prostrated himself at the master's feet. By this gesture, she felt he was making it clear that only one like Baba could give her the supreme realization, which apparently the saint knew she sought. It was on this same day that Baba, hearing of some vainglorious remarks of one of his disciples, took time out to drive home a needed lesson. This man had boasted how hard he had been working, how long he had been fasting, how much he had been suffering, how little he had complained. Baba's eyebrows arched. Any form of pride is anathema to him. Every second, the little I predominates. I work, I fast, I suffer. Then he pointed across the garden to another of his men who was repairing a fence which the crowd had broken. He had been one of the boys in Baba's school in the early days at Ahmednagar and ever since had lived and worked at Baba's ashram. In January, he had come to Nasik, where he had been working day and night, setting up fences, unloading bolts of cloth and sacks of grain, helping to erect the tent and lay the special piping. He was thoroughly exhausted as his posture and movements indicated, but no word of complaint passed from his lips, nor did he boast. There is the man, Baba indicated, who works and never says he works. That is real selfless service. Just last Sunday, we were talking about in discourses how we were talking about selfishness, selflessness, and selfless in all. The next morning, the day when the cloth and grain would be distributed to the poor, we were asked to be in the tent by 6 o'clock. The men of our group helped the Eastern men to give out the bundles, while the Western women sat with the Eastern devotees as they watched the ceremony. When we awakened at daybreak and looked toward the tents, we saw milling mobs of poor people being held within bounds by some of the devotees and stalwart Indian police who had been called out from Nasik to help preserve order. Punctually at 6 o'clock, the procession started, and until 7 o'clock that night, 10,000 beggars filed past Baba, receiving the bundles of grain and cloth from the disciples and from Baba's hand, sweetmeats and blessing. This is India, whispered one of the Eastern men, not the Viceroy's new palace at Delhi, nor the monuments of the historic past, but this. Over 80% of India's population is like this. I had done social work in the slums of America's greatest cities and thought I had seen most abject poverty. But the people in these slums dressed like princes in comparison to these poor creatures. Shreds of dirty cloth, which must have been wore them, inadequately covered bits of their bodies. No wonder many of them had traveled hundreds of miles for a piece of cloth and a few handfuls of grain. One tottering old couple, of whom the man was stone blind, had walked for days for the birthday gift and blessing. A boy whose torn shirt, his only garment, failed to hide his bleeding syphilitic sores, was taken aside by Baba's men for medical care. A group of about 40 men and women lepers with an attendant were segregated from the others and given their bundles and blessings separately. Undoubtedly, there were many other lepers unattended who mingled unnoticed with the crowd. Hour after hour, these 10,000 men, women, and children in all stages of poverty and physical need filed past the platform, holding out emaciated hands for foods and bundle. Here and there, one could see indications in their eyes of a hunger which transcended the physical, as they would come before Baba, bowing their heads to his feet, then looking up into his eyes for a brief moment. As Baba would touch their feet with his sensitive hand, one wondered what measure of his divine love they were able to receive. Certainly, the majority looked as though they would be completely insulated by their dire poverty. But Baba, who sees deeper into men's hearts, no doubt found many who were conscious recipients of his spiritual gifts. One woman, as tattered as the worst, was so lost in ecstasy at Baba's feet that she had to be helped to get up and move along, and induced to receive her bundle. Her supernal joy so filled her eyes with light that even her rags were glorified. I gave and I received, said Baba later. As Baba, I gave. As those wrecks, I received. In the middle of the afternoon, someone asked him if his back hurt. Leaning over and touching with one hand the feet of 10,000 people and with the other handing out 10,000 balls of laddu sweetmeat with only brief intervals of rest was a strenuous ordeal even for a master's body. My back aches so much it doesn't ache at all, he admitted, smiling a little wearily. The whole evolutionary scheme passed through my spine today. This is the first time, that I have touched the feet of those who came to pay me reverence. We had wondered about this deviation from precedent, but when asked for a further explanation, Baba only smiled and said, I saluted the divinity in them as they saluted the divinity in me. That evening, after the ceremony with the beggars was over, we relaxed with Baba to the strains of native devotional music provided by musicians from Bombay. As we sat there, our attention was attracted by the figure of a young man clad in a rough robe patched with burlap. We had noticed him earlier in the day as Baba singled him out from the many thousands who had passed before him. In response to Baba's question, it developed that he had been silent for 2 years, that he had no home, but wandered about from place to place, sleeping wherever he could find shelter and eating whatever was given to him. Baba said he was a spiritually advanced soul, but one who needed the expert help which Baba could render him. So he invited him to stay at our ashram until he was ready to leave for Rahuri. A few days later, he accompanied Baba to the jungle retreat. Now, as we watched his lovely, spontaneous rhythm, it was easy to discern his spiritual ecstasy from the freedom of his movements. Unconscious of any watching audience, he moved his hands and arms as though he were conducting an invisible orchestra of celestial beings. We had noted others during the day who were much more spectacular, who might have deceived those who would be impressed by the trappings of holiness. One such was a tall Hindu clad in a long green robe who stood in the midst of the crowd, holding aloft a picturesque prayer wheel and chanting Om Om. When we asked Baba about him, he said that he was a professional beggar and a rogue. There were two others of these colorful mendicants who make a business of wandering about India and eating at the expense of those who are impressed by their outer regalia. Their long hair was matted, their foreheads painted with weird looking symbols, their bodies covered with ashes. Their possessions they carried in packs on their backs. One shaded himself from the sun with a fantastic straw parasol, while hundreds of Baba's devotees were patiently waiting to be served their luncheon. These three insolently demanded that they be served at once. The result was they were ordered to leave at once. By the morning of the next day, the 25th of February, the number of Baba's visiting devotees had grown to over 1,000. This day was in sharp contrast to the preceding one, which we had witnessed the continual outpouring of Baba's benediction upon those human derelicts. Simply to sit in the audience as a spectator of the bountiful love and mercy which one could see and feel emanating from Baba was a soul stirring experience which moved some of us to tears. Light and darkness, pain and joy mingled in a symphony of human heart beats as the compassionate hands of the Master reached down to the level of humanity's affliction. How superbly Baba transcended the pain involved in this drama, some of us knew later that night after the distribution of gifts was over and the beggars had departed. About midnight, the hour when Baba would break his 40-day fast, he called us to the main house. We seated ourselves around the couch where Baba lay prostrated. Never before had we Westerners seen him like this. We yearned to do something for him as we watched him in breathless silence. But what could we do that Baba himself could not, except to pour out upon him our love? We knew now what a tremendous oblation he had made of himself that day for suffering mankind. Then he stirred slightly. With great effort, he pulled himself up into a semi sitting position, then fell back again to rest a few more moments with his eyes closed. Again, he pulled himself up, this time fully erect. Wearily, he passed his hand over his eyes, inhaled deeply a few times, then looked upon us with a wan smile. I want to talk to you about this day's activity and what it signifies for my universal work. We begged him to defer it until the next day when he would be more rested. But no, that was the psychological moment, apparently. He must impose upon his fatigued and underfed body the task of ministering soul food to his Western neophytes. Only after half an hour of pouring upon his melting love and tendencies did he break his fast with tea and toast, prefaced with a bath and a clean robe. Toward 1 o'clock in the morning, he bade us good night. The next morning at 5, he was fully refreshed and busy with the 101 narration, all of which he personally directed. Smilingly, he spelled out for us, I have that bad avataric habit of supervising every detail myself.
Yeah, Jay
The
Baba.
second day of the cell. Yeah, sure.
Karthik, this reminds me the God is in the details.
Yes, yes, yes.
And if you want, whenever you want, I can read for some time.
Yeah, yeah, you can, and you're almost, yeah, you can start reading now. Second day off, if you're
Okay.
okay.
Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai. The second day of the celebration was one of great rejoicing. On this day, the 1,000 or more devotees who had traveled from all parts of India brought their adoration to Baba, whom they worshipped as an incarnation of God. Through symbolic rituals, they found appropriate outlet for the devotion. These ceremonies began with the washing of the master's feet. Baba's mother led the procession of women who were the first to offer their homage. Baba was seated in a chair on the edge of the platform with his feet resting in a silver basin. To one side stood a silver pitcher containing a mixture of milk and honey. Another pitcher contained water. A little of the milk and honey was poured by the devotees over Baba's feet, then a little of water. Some of the worshippers scooped up a handful of the mixture in the bowl and drank it. Others touched their moistened fingers to their hearts or foreheads. It reminded us, it reminded us of the holy water in Catholic churches and the sacrament of baptism with its symbolic washing away of sins. Later, Baba explained this symbolism to us. The feet, which are physically the lowest part of the body, are spiritually the highest. Physically, the feet go through everything, the good and bad, the beautiful and ugly, the clean and dirty, yet they are above everything, so spiritually. The feet of the master are above everything in the universe, which is like dust to him. When people come to a perfect master and touch his feet with their heads, they lay down, they lay upon him the burden of the sanskaras, those subtle impressions of thought, emotion, and action which bind the individual soul to recurrent earthly lives. This is the burden to which Jesus referred when he said, "Come unto me, ye who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest." A perfect master collects these sanskaras from all over the universe, just as an ordinary person in walking collects dust on his feet. Those who love him deeply and wish to share his burden as much as possible wash his feet with honey, milk, and water, which represent different types of sanskaras, and place at his feet a coconut which symbolizes the complete surrender of their wills to him. The washing of the master's feet was allowed by the ceremony of garlanding him with flowers and dashana, taking the dust off his feet. Again, the women led the procession, each one placing for a moment a wreath of jasmine and roses around his neck, then touching their foreheads to his feet. Another picturesque ritual was performed by Baba's Mohammedan devotees who enveloped him in a mantle of flowers. In a similar manner, our Mohammedan brides and grooms shouted at their wedding. In this instance, it typified Baba's union with God. In all of these acts of devotion, Baba played his role of the loving father who knows the need of his children's hearts for visible and sacramental expression of their love. In the ceremony of washing the feet, the Western group asked permission to participate. As I approached Baba, he gave me an amused smile, and when I looked up into his face after finishing the ablutions, I was greeted with a solemn wink of one eye, showing with what detachment he plays his game with Maya according to the individual need. I take a pause. Any comments, observation? Karthik, I just wanted to add that
Keep going.
yeah, yeah, that in the Baba, family, we don't touch feet because that is a transfer of sanskaras. This is what Dr. Gadekar has told me. So amongst the the
Correct.
people there, yeah. Later, birthday messages and addresses in Baba's honor were read by devotees in Gujarati, Marathi, and English. Can you take it up, Karthik? Can you scroll the?
Yeah, I
Hello?
have. Is it showing up?
No, it's not showing up. I think I'm sorry. Some problem with my end maybe. It's not showing up.
Okay, let me stop sharing and share again.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Now?
No, I can just see your name, KB.
Okay, then let me read, na?
Yeah, please. Sorry, Jay Baba.
Yeah. Malcolm and Will Beckett representing our Western group. Wait a second, let me read the full line. Later, birthday messages and addresses in Baba's honor were read by devotees in Gujarati, Marathi, and English. Malcolm and Will Beckett representing our Western group. The afternoon was given to spiritual songs and dances. One of India's most celebrated singers, Master Krishna, as he is called, sang for 2 hours, and groups of devotional singers from Bombay, Pune, and Dhulia chanted Baba's favorites. One unforgettable feature of the celebration was the performance by the whole male population of Warangal of traditional spiritual dances to the accompaniment of elephant horns, drums, cymbals, clanking chains. These were the villagers with whom Baba had worked so patiently many years before to raise their consciousness and standard of living. Occupying the place of honor in their homes is the photograph of the master who labored so consistently for their betterment. In the presence of this symbol, they prostrate themselves before starting out upon their daily chores of cultivating the fields, repairing roads, or driving to the bazaar with produce. And whenever they pass the ashram at Mehrabad, which is a few miles from their village, they salute it reverently. Now they were here at the birthday feast, every man, woman, and child of them, to pay their respects to their beloved master and friend. On this day, one felt the overflowing joy of the devotees in seeing Baba again and the master's happiness in receiving their love. Yet, to me, the previous day was the more significant one. Perhaps my recent crisis had conditioned me to sense greater joy where pain also abides than in the happiness which lacks the overtone of suffering. Concerning devotees in general, Baba pointed out to us there are always many who are devoted but will not obey, a few who will obey after hesitation, and almost none whose love is so strong and pure that they obey without hesitation and without question. Throughout the birthday feast, Baba's closest disciples were busy serving as usual in the background. These were the truly selfless ones, constant under all trials, unquestioning in their obedience, whom Baba had been training for many years, and through whom he tells us he will one day change the world as Jesus changed the world of his day through his disciples. The next section is change of rhythm. So, going back to Sanjay, there was a reference in our reading where cops were called from Nasik to support the crowd, to manage the crowd. So it
Yeah.
is Nasik
So
that,
that's it is Nasik only because it must have
yeah,
been a bit outskirts of Nasik because it was
correct,
in an
correct.
open area. If I remember seeing the movie,
Okay.
it was in a very open area. Yeah.
So she talks about the two tents, right? The large tent and the kitchen tent and the little hut that was created for Baba. So all this confirms what you were saying. So Nasik and the crowd and so on, and the potli.
Yes, yes. Yeah, Baba.
Yeah, Jai Baba. Change of rhythm. Just as the birthday celebration marked the end of our confinement to the 24-acre estate, so it marked for some of us a complete change of inner and outer rhythm. Baba assigned to us new duties, new routines. My assignment to meditate, write, and think continually of him was a most welcome and joyous one. Having for many years been of a deeply introverted temperament, I had found the discipline of having to be with people almost constantly a trying one. Now that was over. I was free to introvert and write to my heart's content. The weeks passed much too quickly. Baba visited us twice weekly, and once every 2 weeks, the group journeyed to Mehrabad for the day. Only one night did we spend on that sanctified hill, where the vibrations were so spiritually stimulating that I, for one, could not waste a moment of that holy night in sleep. The days when Baba was with us at Nasik were always charged with greater activity and heightened consciousness, because Baba is a divine catalyst who quickens into swifter rhythm the lives of those whom he contacts. We never knew precisely when he would be coming. Sometimes it was in the very early morning before we were awake. On these occasions, we would hear a firm rat-a-tat on the door of one of the rooms, and the call would reverberate throughout the length of the long porch. Baba is here, Baba is here. We would scramble into our clothes in order to be ready to greet him when he knocked at our door. Then would come the awaited knock and a quick, tender embrace. With loving eyes and questioning gestures, he would inquire about our state of mind and body. If nothing needed his attention, he would pass on to the next room. Later, we would all gather in the dining room for breakfast. In the midst of our meal, Baba would appear, gay, teasing sometimes, slipping quietly behind one chair and gently tweaking an ear, then darting away before one could catch him at it. At other times, he would serve us the food himself with such grace and deeply focused concentration that one knew that something more than physical food was eaten that morning. Later, we would sit around his couch, perhaps as he read our dreams, which we had been instructed to record on the nights when he was there and give to him the next morning. Usually, after reading the dream to himself, he would look intently at the dreamer as if conveying some secret information which would someday become known to him. Often, he would laugh merrily and shake his head as if to say, "Just wait and see what this means." I recall one of my own dreams, which had made a deep impression upon me because it was linked with Baba in a wonderful way and seemed to indicate my part in future work with him. After reading this dream, he looked so deeply into my eyes that to this day, whenever I think of his face, I see those pools of infinite love reflecting into my soul, as if re-establishing an eternal connection between us. When he handed the dream back to me, he ordered me to return it to him on a particular date. Perhaps one of these years, on that date, the prophecy of the dream will be fulfilled. So she does not give too much of the details. Later in the morning, after we had attended to our necessary duties, Baba would send for us to meet with him in the main house. Sitting around him on the floor or on low stools, we would partake of the spiritual food he offered. By means of his board, he would discourse on divine love, the cosmic plane of spiritual consciousness, on the realization of God. Sometimes he would discuss some future phase of his work or someone's immediate problem. Often, a crisis would develop for a member of the group, as if by chance, but always it bore the unmistakable imprint of Baba's skillful maneuvering. In the afternoon, after tea, when the heat had somewhat abated, we would gather on the main veranda while Baba and some of the group played table tennis. This game, which he seemed thoroughly to enjoy, he played with great zest and concentration. One always had the impression that in some way he used the game and energies aroused for his inner activities. No score was ever kept, but he loved a swift, clever return, and he himself worked hard and skillfully. At times, his playing of the game was used by him for a very different purpose. There was one period in which his universal work took him out of his body a great deal during waking hours. A faraway look would come into his eyes, and the next moment he would be lying prostrate and motionless on the couch with his head covered. After a while, he would pull himself up with considerable effort and force himself to the table, motioning one of his partners to follow. Then, supporting himself by holding on to the table with one hand, he would begin to play, slowly, laboriously. Sometimes he would clutch the table to steady his swaying body. Then he would proceed with the tortuous game. These moments with him were heartrending because one could see and feel the agony to which he subjected himself uh, in compelling his consciousness to return to the physical body. Occasionally, he would stop the game and drop into a nearby chair with his head back and eyes closed. The group would stand by, silently watching, wondering, longing to help, but powerless to do anything. One or two of us would feel impelled to drop down on our knees beside his chair and touch his feet or limbs. From the look of grateful love which he would turn upon us, we gathered that this helped a little to hold him to the earth, where he elected to stay to fulfill his destined mission. Later, he would walk briskly through the garden with the group, and by dinner time, he would be his beautifully poised and tranquil self. After dinner, he would again give us spiritual food, or if the night were warm enough, we would sit with him silently in the garden under the brilliant stars, as the velvety warmth of an Indian summer evening merged with the glowing halo of divine love which Baba would shed upon us. Shortly before 9 o'clock, we could feel Baba starting to withdraw, and if his eyes were visible, we could see that faraway liquid expression which heralded his imminent departure from the restrictions of this earth plane. Flowery language and I think beautiful summary of the Nasik Sahwas that we read today. So we'll stop at this point. The next one is a symbolic excursion. That's the next section. So we'll stop at this point today and continue next week. And of course, we do discourses tomorrow.
Yeah, Jai Baba. The picture that I shared last time on the background was the bungalow where Baba used to visit, stay, and go back to Mehrabad. And while these Westerners were kept in those 12 rooms that were built very close to that bungalow.
Okay.
So Baba reclining on that chair, and these people, whatever she is describing is definitely in that bungalow, which was behind behind where I was standing in the group, that bungalow was there.
Got it.
Where the kitchen was and where the restrooms were there, and probably Baba must have stayed in one of those rooms in that bungalow.
Okay.
Opposite that bungalow in a straight line, like a vertical, like a T. It's not parallel. It's like a T to that bungalow entrance. Were these 12 rooms that were built?
Great.
That was the most modern accommodation that Baba had got built for his Western lovers.
Yeah, she also describes it vividly with the furniture and the
Table.
Yeah, correct. Very beautiful.
And a nice cozy bed.
Yes. So how far did you reach?
I am at Chakan.
Okay. So
very close to Ashokji, physically.
Yes.
Passing by Chakan means passing close to Pune.
Yeah. Pune. Correct. Okay. So Safe travels, and let's catch up tomorrow morning.
Yeah. You too. Take care.
All right, thank you. And I'm
Yeah.
glad the mobile internet held up pretty well till now. So I don't know if it was
Yeah.
my side or your side, Ashok. It could have been mine as well when it didn't
No,
scroll.
that's fine. I'm happy where I could join.
Sure, we are happy too. Jai Baba,
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba,
Jai Baba.
Sir.
Jai
Jai
Baba.
Baba.
Say
Jai Baba.
safe travels, Sanjay.
Jai Baba, Dolly ji.
Thank
Jai
you.
Baba.
Thank you, Ashok ji. Jai Baba.